Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Age Better. I'm your host, Barbara Hannah Grufferman, and I'm so happy to have with me today Beatty Cohan. She has been a psychotherapist for over 35 years, and we are going to talk about five common relationship issues that many people in midlife confront, and she is going to give us her best answers to fix them. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Beatty, welcome to Age Better.
It's so nice to be with you, Barbara. This is great. We have
Thank
lots,
you.
lots to talk about, and I have lots of good news to share.
You know, I always love good news.
Look, the fact is that we're really not doing well when it comes to our relationships. I mean, if you look at the statistics, we're looking at a divorce rate of 48% for first marriages. For second marriages, one would hope that you've learned something from the first marriages also end in divorce. And then people will say, well, what about third or what about fourth marriages? Well, the statistic for third marriages is that 72% of third marriages also end in divorce. And the thing that's so interesting too, Barbara, is that books and media coverage about relationships and therapists and relationship coaches and love coaches, and yet again we have to look at the reality here. And the reality is that we are clearly in a downward spiral. I came up with a 10-step formula that's been used by thousands of people around the world over these past few years that teaches us exactly how to assess. And when I use the term assessment, it is so unsexy, it is so unromantic, but when you think about it, we assess everything in our life, our lipsticks, our cars, our computers. So this formula teaches people how to assess who's right for you and who's wrong for you before committing to any serious relationship. Because there's three things basically that we need to learn and we need to do, not just learn, but really put into action if we're ever going to be able to find a healthy relationship with anyone. So before the assessment, each of us, number one, each of us needs to be in a good place emotionally and psychologically and psychiatrically. We need to do some work. We need to deal with our issues, our skeletons in
So
the
we have
closet.
to get ourselves really healthy and whole before we can really be a potentially a good partner for someone else. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And to be
Mm-hmm.
a good partner for ourselves as well. The relationship needs to be the icing on the cake, and we need to be the cake. We need to have our act together. And unless we do, we are not going to be in a position to be able to make good decisions, certainly good relationship decisions. So that's really number one. Number two is that despite, again, all the media focus in the books and talk about relationships, I have found that most people have no idea what ingredients really go into a successful relationship. So if you're not in a good place and you don't know the ingredients and you don't know how to assess, why should we be surprised that we are seeing these very depressing statistics as we are seeing changing when it comes to domestic violence, when it comes to divorce, but we are not. And people really need to be willing to do this kind of work. They need to be honest with themselves. I mean, we can hope and dream and wish that we're going to find the perfect partner. Of course, the perfect partner doesn't exist. We're not perfect. Nobody will ever be, perfect. But we do need to go through this process of
Yeah.
getting ourselves together, of learning the ingredients, and learning how to assess. And the 10-step formula culminated in my book, For Better, For Worse, Forever, Discover the Path to Lasting Love.
So now let's get to some of those biggest relationship issues that people can, not necessarily will, but can confront when they're in midlife. So let's start with this one.
Okay.
Like, why do I always end up with the wrong partner, right? So you actually referenced this before, how
Yes.
divorce rates and then the second one and the third one really don't look any better. In fact, they could even be worse. So many of us do find ourselves repeatedly in relationships that don't work. Could you shed some light on why this happens and how can we break this pattern so that we can find the right partner?
Well, hopefully, people will go through the process of getting themselves together and learning the ingredients and using the formula. But then it comes to, of course, issues of communication and problem solving. And what I find is that, again, and I'm not making judgments, but people have difficulty just having conversations, just, day to day types of conversations. And when there are conflicts, when there are differences, for the most part, learned the skill of emotional communication and problem solving. So typically, if there's a problem, our tendency would be to deny or avoid or blame or shut down because we don't know exactly what to do. So it's so important to learn how to say it, where to say it, if to say it, when to say it, and how to do all of this well. So this is a skill-based
Yeah.
kind of thing. I mean, who taught us anything like this? Most people never had the opportunity to, probably grow up in families where they saw this kind of dynamic really going on. So if we're not learning it in the families, if we're not learning anything in school, just trying to figure things out, watching television shows and movies, and of course there's so many dysfunctional television and shows and movies out there, where do we learn then, Barbara, the fundamentals? The fact is, we don't. So we are left to our own devices to try to figure this out. So whether or not people are having problems with their children, different parenting views, or whether or not they're having sexual difficulties, the skill, we have to know how to do this. And we have to, of course, in our assessment of whether or not the person is right for us and wrong for us. I mean, this is something so important. I mean, when people ask me all the time, what are the two most important ingredients that really make or break relationships? Again, as unromantic and unsexy as all of this sounds, it happens to be emotional communication and problem solving. Because if
Right.
we can't talk and work things out, we are not ever going to be able to have a successful and happy relationship with anyone.
You mentioned divorce. We do know that the gray divorce is a phenomenon, that
Yeah.
it's increasing, and that women in particular don't always come out ahead, at least financially, and sometimes even socially. And that could kind of put them in a position of feeling a little less secure, less confidence, which could lead them back to making not great choices once again. Who knows what the reasons are, but I think really your message is that whatever your reasons have been, let's stop the pattern and let's
Exactly.
take a look at your assessment list and let's forge ahead with that in your back pocket. Okay. So the next is big issue, putting sizzle back in your relationship. We know that certainly when you've hit midlife, over 50, if you've been married to the same person, you've been together probably for a long time, for a few
Yes.
decades,
Yes.
possibly. Or it
Yes.
could even be a newer relationship, but still. And we know that sex and intimacy and relationships, happiness or feelings of joy, feelings of frustration, all emotions ebb and flow throughout
Yes.
life, throughout relationships. We know this to be true. Sex and intimacy could get a little dull if you don't take some action and really assess. And I happen to like that word assess. I'm a big believer in assessing everything
Right.
regularly.
Right. Right.
Always about, head to toe, inside and out, whatever it is we're talking about. Let's do a little assessment, see where
Exactly.
you are, right? And kind of
Exactly.
look at all the different facets of it to see if you need to make some changes. So, how do we put sizzle back in the relationship that could potentially be a long term relationship that's getting a little stale?
Okay, again, each of us needs to be in a good place. If we are feeling depressed, if we have a variety of different psychiatric issues, whether or not they're major or minor, we're not going to be in the mood. So again, it begins with us. How are we feeling about ourselves emotionally, physically, sexually, as women, as men? Women are not going to want, and men too, are not going to want to jump into bed and have sex if they're angry at their partner, if they have all of this unfinished business that's never been resolved. It's simply not going to happen.
Right.
So those are the two most important things that we really need to address. Okay, so assuming you're feeling good, a feeling your relationship is a very nice place, and you so then we need to look at, for example, the sexual side effects of a variety of different medications,
Right.
over the counter medication and prescription medications, and not be afraid to, discuss this with our doctors, because it's amazing how a change, and people need to know that there are all kinds of sexual side effects with, for example, antidepressant medication. So changing the dose, it may be about having the discussion, with your physician. But again, you have to look at the whole gamut of what is it that you're eating, what is it that you're using. Alcohol is an example. It is a depressant. So
Yes.
that too is going to be impacting your drive. What about medical problems? If you're not feeling well physically, of course, you can always cuddle, you can always, hold each other, you can always hold each other's hands, and you can always kiss. But again, these two things will always impact, how we are feeling in terms of our sex drives. If
And
we're
let's
looking
not forget about women. Medications, of course, could be taken by both men and women. And
right,
women are, as we know at this age, many of them are experiencing or have
right,
experienced menopause,
right,
which
absolutely.
causes, certain physical changes, a
Yes.
lot of physical changes, actually, and could really impact how they experience sex, at least sexual intercourse, and the sexual
Absolutely.
experience in a negative way.
Exactly. I mean, for example, our estrogen levels, and women also have testosterone levels. I mean, these levels, they really change over time. And this is the discussion that we need to initiate with our physicians. And I've said this all the time. Nobody, no doctor has ever asked me, "How's your sex life?" It's
No,
it's amazing. It doesn't come up. So
no,
we
it
as
does
the
not.
consumer, we as the patient, we need to have the courage to bring this up, because there's so many things, Barb, as you say, that can actually be done. Is there time for a wonderful story
Of course, Beatty,
about?
go for it.
Okay, I get a call from a man who's 85 years old, and he says, "Listen, I've been married for a number of years. I love my wife very much, but she doesn't want to have sex anymore." Now he's 85 years old. And I said, "All right, why don't you come in with her, and we'll see what's going on." And she'd had a number of physical problems, and they loved each other, and they traveled, but she didn't have any desire whatsoever. So here was the proposition. We agreed that we would try over just a couple of sessions, if she was willing to take some of my recommendations, and see what happens. If nothing happened, all I did was waste some time and a few dollars. So the assignment was, the homework was to make some dates to have sex. Now, sex, he was not able to have intercourse, so that was fine.
Yeah,
And to just,
totally fine. I've
yes,
had a lot of
totally
episodes
fine.
about that. Sex doesn't mean intercourse.
Exactly,
No, sex
exactly,
is intimacy and pleasure, and and
exactly,
and how you define it.
absolutely
Hmm.
correct. So she agreed, but very reluctantly. She was angry with him. She was angry with me, but she said, "All right, I'm going to give this a try." And after two dates for sex, and they used lubricants, and actually she agreed she'd had a vibrator that she hadn't used in 1,000 years. And I got an email from her, and the email, it was one word. She said, "Success." And what happened was,
Yay, Beatty!
yay! So, and here, 85, 70, 75. And what worked was that they were willing to give it a shot. And in the doing, she said that she actually had sensations, and that she was even able to experience orgasm.
Yay, I'm
And
really happy for her. And I applaud him for taking
yeah,
this initiative. Aren't you
absolutely.
impressed?
I was so impressed with the two of
Yes.
them. So impressed. And she was one of these women. I mean, she was really not having it. And I mean, he literally had to drag her into the house, which is where my office is in East Hampton. And, she was really not happy. The Nike logo, right? Which I love. just do it.
Yeah.
And sometimes when it comes to sex, when it comes to a lot of things in life, if we wait for the feelings to surface, we may wait a lifetime and it may never happen. So
Right.
there's two ways to change how you feel. You can work on the feelings, or you can combine and work on the doing. And oftentimes in the doing, you have a wonderful change in the feelings.
Absolutely. And I think that the key messages from this question and your answer is that, try to fix your physical boundaries that are really causing you to not enjoy sex or even think about having any kind of sex or
Right.
sexual experience. So, fix that first and then plan it. I'm a big believer in planning it because the
Yeah.
day can go by and then the day's done. And at the end of the day, you might be too tired. And then you'll think, okay, oh, another day went by and it didn't happen. Or fill in the blank, whatever it is didn't happen. And if you plan it, if you
Right.
schedule it, it's
Right.
also very sexy. Like you have a date, as you said. Great
E-
advice, Beatty.
Exactly. And it works. And there's one other
It
thing that I
does.
want to say though that's very important, and I coined this phrase many years ago, emotional foreplay. So that there needs to be this emotional connection, at least certainly for the majority of women. And the other thing is that men need to understand, whether or not you're older or younger, that women still love and want and need, 15, 20 minutes of foreplay. So that, there needs to be some
Unless
real,
you have a really good vibrator. And I highly recommend experimenting with a few sex toys, whether it's a simple vibrator, great, but there's the big world out there. And there are a
it,
lot of new products that are easy to buy.
sex is really important because you were saying, Barbara, a day can go by, and what I've seen with couple, years can go
Years
by.
can go by.
Decades.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah, 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 yeah. That's not a good idea, everyone. And also, it just really creates this feeling of being closer to your partner. Okay, question number three, Beatty.
Yes.
We referenced divorce several times already. We know that people in midlife, the gray divorce phenomenon, it is real, it is
Yes.
happening. So, how can people get divorced in a way, I mean, the good divorce, if you will, in a way that will maintain their relationship with each other, with their kids, if there are kids, certainly with friends and, shared friends and family. How can they do that? What tips do you have for people who are kind of entering that particular chapter?
Barbara, it's a decision that people really need to make. I mean, I literally beg people to do it well. And I remind them that once upon a time they were madly in love and they hoped that their, love was going to last a lifetime, and for a variety of reasons it has not, and particularly, people who have children. I mean, we really have to make a choice whether we're going to go down yet and self-destructive path, or whether or not we're going to make the decision at this point in our lives, even though we didn't, our marriage didn't work out, to pivot and do it well, because the ramifications, I mean, the consequences of divorcing badly, I mean, it's not just about punishing your partner, but you're punishing yourself, you're punishing your family. And the fact is that it's a lose-lose proposition. And I always suggest, and I've been very fortunate in all these years, there's been very few divorces in my practice, uh, that if people in fact are not able and don't want to work things out for, whatever reasons, that they seek out a collaborative divorce attorney and that they try to work things out through mediation. And in the final analysis, I mean, going to court, I mean, the laws are pretty clear, 50-50 splits. And this is where something is really important too, is that when people are getting married and when there's a lot of money, I really do recommend prenups. And I know that's something also that's unromantic and unsexy, but there's certain things, if you're bringing, X amount of dollars into a marriage where there's a lot of money, you want to protect yourself.
Especially true, I think, I'm sure you'll agree, Beatty, for people who are entering into a second or third
Yeah,
marriage, maybe later in life when they both
right,
have developed their careers and
right.
possibly their financial situations are really better than when they were younger. And they may have individual children that they want to protect
Exactly.
in the future, and so on and so forth. So I couldn't agree more. But really, how do we, like, what are some of the practical steps that people can take to make sure that they keep the relationships at least civil, if nothing else? But what are some tips you have?
I think that when people are in the midst of something like this where they feel that they are not going to be able to do it well, I recommend not only, hopefully hiring a collaborative divorce attorney, but also trying to work either individually or as a couple. And the couple counseling may not be, successful at all and may not even be workable, and nobody may really want to do that. I mean, ideally, to be able to, try to sort out what happened, and to be able to, at this point, we have to talk about the children, we have to talk about the money, to have an agenda of items that need to absolutely legally have to be acknowledged and addressed and resolved.
Right.
And people have a choice. They can do this nicely, or they can do it badly, and they can end up before a judge who will be making probably the same sorts of recommendations as that would come out of working with a mediator or working with a collaborative divorce attorney. And sometimes, Barbara, it's not going to work. And
Yeah.
sometimes couples are simply going to have to fight it out in court. And it's very unfortunate because it is a very destructive process to go through. It puts everybody, including, if there are children, in a very, very bad place. And look at what we're teaching our children then. We're teaching our children about hate. We're teaching our children that differences cannot be sorted through in a civil kind of a fashion.
Hmm.
And it's damaging. It's a lose-lose proposition for everybody. We've already
Right.
lost by, the marriage is not working. So that's been a loss. It's been a
Yeah.
loss for everybody. And do we want to?
Right.
So I think there's a lot of discussion that has to, take place, and whether or not it's with, a collaborative divorce attorney or with a counselor, it's really worthwhile trying to convince. And I say that I've literally begged a couple of couples who've divorced over the years to not go down this destructive, self-destructive, volatile path where everybody is going to end up losing.
Right. And they also should look at the long game, the bigger picture too. If they're contemplating divorce, at some point they have kids who may end up having their own children, which means
Exactly.
those are your grandchildren, and you want to maybe co-grandparent. You want to be on the same team, I think, ultimately. So yeah, a lot of reasons, a lot of reasons for trying to work it out in a way, even if you still are divorcing. Okay, number four, friendships. Friendships are so important. We know how important maintaining social connections are to
Right.
age better. We know this from research. I follow Dan Buettner, who follows the Blue Zone
Yes,
people
exactly.
around the world. I
Yes.
follow him very closely. It's so very interesting to me. But the number one reason why these societies around the world live so long is sure, how they move their bodies every day and what they
Right.
eat and so on.
Right.
But the biggest reason is how they maintain their social connections. And this is just critical. And not only is it critical for our long-term health and well-being, but it's also really fun. I mean, who doesn't love to hang out with our best girlfriends? Or to
Yes.
have a phone call, or I mean, every morning, just so you know, every morning there's a trio of us, and every morning the three of us, every morning, speak on the phone, except weekends.
Well, that is absolutely a wonderful pattern of behavior. My heavens. And it is very important. And I know that people get so involved with family and work. And yet, the research is very, very clear that the one thing that heals us emotionally and physically, it heals our brains, it heals our bodies, are our connections. Our connections with other people and count on people who can count on us. I mean, there's absolutely no disagreement in any of the research around the world that that's the number one thing that we really have to invest more time and more energy in. And what was really interesting, I was reading a Harvard study, and it's not the social connections, the likes and the followers. It's not that. Real friendships who really genuinely care about you and who are invested in your well-being and who you are invested in their well-being as well. And it takes some time. You
Yeah,
know,
that's what I wanted to hear from
yes,
you
because
about. So, midlife, a lot of us had, if we had children in school years ago, we have mom friends. I know I still have my mom
right.
friends. I have my work friends. You have different groups of friends, but life is constantly evolving. So, how do you maintain the relationship so you don't lose sight of the relationship so you don't lose the relationships
Well,
um,
well,
going forward?
just like we were talking about sex, we have to just do it.
Yeah,
We have to remind ourselves of the importance of these kinds of relationships, and just like plants, they don't grow on their own. I mean, they have to be nurtured, they have to be watered, they have to be minded, and this is the formula. I mean, this is the recipe. Whether or not you're talking about romantic relationships or love relationships or girlfriend relationships or relationships of any kind, if they're important, we have to be willing to invest some time. I mean, and these days with our phones and our devices, as my late father used to say, it takes 30 seconds to make a phone call, or it takes
yeah,
less than 30 seconds to say I love you, or I was thinking about you, or I miss you. And I can't wait to see you, and I can't wait to connect with you. So there's no reason at all
yes,
to not be in contact.
yes.
I
Okay, we are now getting to number five, question number five, which
Yes.
really is they're all biggies. This is a
Yes.
biggie
Yes.
because I don't want this to, be built up so much, but it's surviving infidelity. Should I stay or should I go is how
Yeah.
you and I discussed it. And
Yeah.
that's a biggie because that on so many levels, that is disastrous potentially to a relationship. So, Beatty, take it from there. What do you do?
Well, people have to make a decision whether or not they want to try and mend the relationship. I mean, that's really the first question, and that's the first question that really needs to be answered.
Mhm.
Obviously, the person who was involved in an extramarital affair, that other person really does need to go. The couple also really needs to understand what went wrong. Was it the communication? Was it the lack of sex? How did we go from I love you, I love you, I want to marry you, and we got married and we had kids together, to a place in our relationship where one or both went out and had an extramarital affair? Was it the sex? So I think it's really important that people understand what conditions, what brought this couple to a place where one or both did make the decision, and it wasn't something that just happened. You make a decision whether or not you're going to have an affair. You're going to make a decision whether or not you're not. So the people individually and as a couple, they have decisions to make. Do we walk away from this, which is another option, or
Right.
do
Or
we?
do we try to make it work? So I think like really what people have to figure out is why did this happen?
Exactly.
And
But I've seen over all these years that if a couple is really committed to working out the issues, to understanding what happened. We all make mistakes in our life. And it's not about forgiveness or forgetting. It's about, can we as a couple, I talk a lot about, creating a new marriage. Can
yeah,
we together? We know what this marriage has been like. It hasn't been so great. We didn't communicate. We didn't have sex. We didn't talk. I drank too much. a lot of things went on. But are we as a couple, am I as an individual, am I committed to creating something new and better? And I've seen couples do it all the time with a
I
little bit
like
of
that.
help here and there, but it can work. But again, there has to be the desire, Barbara. If people don't want to do this, if they're absolutely committed to walking away, the probability of their probably doing the same thing in their second or third marriage, is all we have to do is look at the statistics, will, it'll probably continue.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that was incredible. Beatty, this conversation was great. We have done our 5 questions. We've reached the end. They were really wonderful and so helpful and insightful. So thank you everyone for joining in. And Beatty, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Barbara.